Good afternoon and welcome to Lunch Break Live with Tea Party Patriots Action. I'm Bill Pasco, Tea Party Patriots man in Washington, and I'll be giving you both the call to action and the Washington report today. There's an awful lot going on in Washington this week. Let's get right to it. The House and Senate are both scheduled to be in session from Monday all the way through Friday this week because they intend to take a week-long recess next week for the 4th of July. We'll see. Last week in the House, there was no activity because they weren't in session. This week in the House will return on Monday with the first vote set for 5:30 p.m. This week in the House will come back Monday with the first vote set for 5:30 p.m. At that time, the House is scheduled to consider 20 bills under suspension of the rules. On Tuesday and for the balance of the week, the House will consider 4 bills pursuant to a rule. They are H.R. 3944. That's the Military Construction Veterans Affairs Appropriations Act. Note, this is the first of the fiscal year 2026 appropriations bills to hit the floor of the House. The Milcon VA bill is almost always the first of the 12 appropriations bills to come to the floor because it's usually the easiest to pass. Regardless of who's in the majority, Republicans or Democrats, few want to cast a vote that could be tagged as being against veterans. Second bill up will be H.R. 875, the Jeremy and Angie Saye and Sergeant Brandon Mendoza Protect Our Communities from DUIs Act of 2025. H.R. 275, the Special Interest Alien Reporting Act of 2025. And H.Res. 516, condemning the violent June 2025 riots in Los Angeles. Then the House will take up, under suspension of the rules, H.Res. 519, condemning the attacks on Minnesota lawmakers in Brooklyn Park and Champlin, Minnesota, and calling for unity and the rejection of political violence in Minnesota and across the United States as amended. Last week in the Senate came back on Monday and voted to end debate on the nomination of Gary Andres to serve as Assistant Secretary of Health and Human Services. On Tuesday, the Senate voted to end debate on the nomination of Olivia Trusty to be a member of the Federal Communications Commission for the term ending June 30th, 2025, and then voted to end debate on the nomination of Olivia Trusty to be a member of the Federal Communications Commission for a 5-year term beginning July 1, 2025. Then the Senate voted to confirm Gary Andres to serve as an Assistant Secretary of Health and Human Services and to confirm Olivia Trusty to serve as a member of the Federal Communications Commission for the term ending June 30, 2025. Then the Senate voted to pass S. 1582, the Genius Act, a bill to provide for the regulation of payment stablecoins. On Wednesday, the Senate voted to end debate on the nomination of Rodney Scott to serve as Commissioner of U.S. Customs and Border Protection in the Department of Homeland Security. Then the Senate voted to confirm that nomination of Olivia Trusty to be a member of the Federal Communications Commission for a 5-year term beginning July 1, 2025. Then the Senate voted to confirm Rodney Scott to serve as Commissioner of U.S. Customs and Border Protection in the Department of Homeland Security. And then they were done. This week in the Senate will return on Monday with the first vote set for 5:30 p.m. At that time, the Senate will proceed to a roll call vote on the nomination of Daniel Zimmerman to serve as an Assistant Secretary of Defense. Then, based on the Majority Leader's cloture filings, I anticipate we'll see votes on the nominations of Paul Dabar to serve as an Assistant Secretary of Commerce and Kenneth Keyes to serve as an Assistant Secretary of the Treasury. At some point, likely early in the week, the Senate may well take up a resolution offered by Virginia Democrat Tim Kaine to require congressional approval for military action in Iran. The War Powers resolution ripens Friday, but Majority Leader Thune wants to use the end of the week for the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, so he may move it up earlier in the week if he can get a time agreement with the minority leader. Now let's talk about the TikTok ban. On Thursday of last week, President Trump signed an executive order extending for another 90 days the imposition of the ban on the Chinese social media app TikTok. The ban has now been delayed until September 17, 2025. This is the third time Trump has extended the execution of the ban since he returned to office. Now let's talk about rescissions. On Tuesday of last week, Senate Majority Leader John Thune announced that he would be transmitting H.R. 4, the Rescissions Act that passed the House a few weeks ago, to the Appropriations Committee. That's an acknowledgement by Thune that the bill will not pass the Senate in its current form. Senator Susan Collins of Maine, chairman of the Senate Appropriations Committee, has publicly questioned the bill's rescission of funds from the PEPFAR program. That's the President's Emergency Program for AIDS Relief, which has conservatively been estimated to have helped save the lives of 25 million Africans since the program was created under the presidency of George W. Bush. If the committee amends the bill, or it's amended on the floor and then passed, it would have to go back to the House for reconsideration there. The deadline to get this rescissions bill back to the President for his signature is July 18. Now let's talk reconciliation. The reconciliation bill has moved to the Senate, and the Byrd Bath has begun. That's the process in which the Senate parliamentarian checks every provision in the measure to make sure it meets and passes the Byrd rule test that we discussed last week at length. If you missed last week's episode, I suggest you go back and watch it or listen to it in its podcast form, because we spent significant time discussing the Byrd rule and its effect on Senate consideration of a reconciliation bill. The process has actually been going on for weeks now behind the scenes. The Senate parliamentarian, Elizabeth McDonough, has been meeting with both Republican and Democrat staffers from the various committees that have been instructed to produce legislation for the bill. And she's listened as Republican staffers make their arguments for why something deserves to be in the bill, and she's been listening to Democrat staffers as they make their arguments for why something should not be in the bill. Now they've moved to the next step, where she meets with both Republican and Democrat staffers at the same time and hears their arguments in front of each other. Then she makes decisions on individual titles, one committee at a time. The Banking Committee, under Chairman Tim Scott of South Carolina, received its Byrd Bath last Thursday. Punchbowl News described the parliamentarians' review of the committee's work as a procedural wallop, and that's a pretty good description of what happened. The parliamentarians struck 4 provisions from the Banking Committee title, and together they totaled $8.8 billion in projected savings. Without those 4 provisions, which include totally zeroing out the funding for the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which was projected to save $6.4 billion by itself, the committee's projected savings come in at a measly $600 million, significantly short of the $1 billion in savings it was instructed to find. Complicating matters further, the Banking Committee title also includes a provision that would spend $1 billion toward the Defense Production Act fund, meaning it's really got to come up with about $2 billion in savings. And now, after the parliamentarian has struck so many provisions, what we call Byrd Droppings, the committee is only $600 million of the way there. The Banking Committee has a lot of work to do, and fast, because the Senate Republican leadership wants to bring the bill to the floor by midweek, likely Thursday, in hopes it can pass the bill before they break for the 4th of July recess at the end of the week. One thing the Banking Committee could do would be to rewrite the CFPB funding provision to come in closer to the House side, which cut the agency's funding from 12% of the Federal Reserve's operating budget to 5%, rather than cutting it all the way to 0. CBO estimated that the House plan would save approximately $4 billion, which would allow the committee to meet its reconciliation target. The parliamentarian has also nixed other provisions in the bill. The bill cannot repeal the Biden EPA's tailpipe emissions rule for model year 2027 and later, nor can the bill eliminate a variety of Inflation Reduction Act programs, nor can it include Utah Republican Senator Mike Lee's revised REINS Act, the measure that would return more control over agency rules to elected and accountable members of the legislature, rather than leave that power in the hands of unelected and unaccountable bureaucrats. The Finance Committee title began its Byrd Bath on Friday. First, the parliamentarian met with Democrat committee staffers. Then she met with Republican staffers. On Sunday, the two sides got together to make their arguments in front of the parliamentarian and each other. That Byrd Bath is not yet complete, so we're still waiting to hear what will happen to the guts of the bill, the tax and Medicaid provisions. Stay tuned. Now let's talk about what happened Saturday night. Trump attacks Iran. At about midnight Eastern Time on Friday night, B-2 stealth bombers lifted off from Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri. A group flew west toward the West Coast and beyond that, Guam, while a different group flew east. The group flying west had their transponders turned on, making their flights visible to commercial flight trackers. The group flying east kept their transponders turned off, making their flight virtually undetectable. 17 hours later, at about 5 p.m. on Saturday, a U.S. submarine fired 30 Tomahawk cruise missiles at surface elements of the Isfahan nuclear facility in Iran. About an hour later, at 6 p.m. Eastern Time, the lead B-2 stealth bomber met up with U.S. fighter jets flying high in the skies over western Iran, and together they entered Iranian airspace. They found no resistance, neither in the air nor from the ground. Just to be sure, as the planes approached sensitive areas, the fighter jets laid down suppressing fire. At around 6:40 p.m., the lead B-2 stealth bomber dropped its payload on the Fordo nuclear facility, much of which is buried several hundred feet underneath a mountain. 5 other B-2s then dropped their payloads on Fordo, and one dropped its payload of 2 bombs on the surface elements of the nuclear facility at Natanz. All the payloads were released by 7:05 p.m. Eastern Time, 25 minutes after the start of the attack. Each B-2 was loaded with 2 30,000-pound GBU-57 massive ordnance penetrators, MOPs, a bunker buster bomb that was developed on the orders of President George W. Bush when he learned more than 2 decades ago that Iran was building a nuclear weapons facility underneath a mountain. In total, 14 MOPs were dropped over the Fordo and Natanz facilities. None of the U.S. planes, neither the fighters nor the bombers, was fired at by Iranian forces. At 7:50 p.m. on Saturday evening, President Trump posted a statement to his Truth Social account declaring that, quote, "We have completed our very successful attack on the 3 nuclear sites in Iran, including Fordo, Natanz, and Isfahan. All planes are now outside of Iran airspace. A full payload of bombs was dropped on the primary, Fordo. All planes are safely on their way home." End quote. Let's talk for a moment about why President Trump decided to bomb Iran's nuclear facilities. When assessing potential threats, policymakers must be guided by their assessments of other nations' capabilities and intent. A foreign government with capability, but no ill intent, doesn't threaten us or our interests. Similarly, a foreign government with ill intent, but no capability to do significant damage, doesn't significantly threaten us or our interests. When destructive capability marries ill intent, however, a significant threat arises. For almost half a century, going back to its birth in 1979, The Revolutionary Islamic Republic of Iran has been a particularly vicious and violent foe of the United States and its allies, including Israel. In the 4.5 decades since, it has made its malicious intent toward us and our allies clear. In November 1979, Iranian radicals overran the U.S. Embassy in Tehran and took 66 American diplomats hostage, then held them captive for 444 days. Since then, Iranian-backed terrorists have killed Americans in Beirut, Lebanon on multiple occasions, and in Saudi Arabia, and have hijacked an airplane and kidnapped and killed the CIA station chief in Beirut, and have killed Americans and Israelis in Iraq and Israel for decades. Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis, and Palestinian Islamic Jihad, the self-styled Axis of Resistance, which regularly attacks Americans, Israelis, and U.S. interests, are just some of the Islamic terrorist groups Iran supports with funding, training, intelligence, and weapons. Iran did not satisfy itself with providing ongoing support for allied terrorist groups operating against the U.S. and Israel. Iran also built up its own military capability, including development of a ballistic missile program regarded by experts as the largest in the Middle East. In the late 1980s, Iran's Islamist regime launched Project Ahmad, its nuclear weapons program. While denying it was pursuing such a capability, it nevertheless built facilities to conduct research and enrich uranium to near weapons grade. Documents captured by Israeli intelligence in 2018 prove that Iran's revolutionary government had lied all along. Quote, "The papers show these guys were working on nuclear bombs," unquote, said a nuclear engineer and former inspector for the International Atomic Energy Agency, the IAEA. Iran's desire to obtain a nuclear weapon capability was so well known that Barack Obama negotiated with the Iranian regime over Iran's nuclear program. The agreement he concluded was so bad that when then-candidate Donald Trump spoke at a rally organized by Tea Party Patriots, Trump said, "Never, ever, ever in my life have I seen any transaction so incompetently negotiated as our deal with Iran, and I mean never." As president, Trump withdrew the United States from Obama's terrible nuclear deal and instead imposed maximum pressure on the Iranian regime. Joe Biden overturned Trump's policy, eased sanctions on Iran, and spent 4 years trying to create a new deal with Iran. Biden's policy failed, and Iran made so much progress in pursuit of nuclear weapons that just a week and a half ago, the board of the IAEA declared Iran in breach of its non-proliferation obligations, after having released a report a week earlier saying Iran had enough uranium enriched to 60% purity, near weapons grade, to make as many as 9 nuclear bombs. Regarding Iran's pursuit of nuclear weapons, intent may not yet have married capability, but they're engaged, and the nuptials are fast approaching. In a bid to end Iran's pursuit of nuclear weapons diplomatically, President Trump recruited one of his closest friends to serve as his personal representative. Trump told the Iranians they could negotiate for 60 days. The Iranians refused reasonable terms, and the 60 days ended a week and a half ago without a deal. On day 61, Israel launched its airstrikes against Iran's nuclear weapons program and Iran's ability to deliver such weapons on ballistic missiles. In doing so, it wasn't just serving its own interests, it was also serving America's interests. Israel has successfully degraded large portions of Iran's nuclear facilities and ballistic missile cache. Of 3 known uranium enrichment sites, 1 is destroyed and a second is harmed. But the third site, the Fordo site, built underground to protect it from air assault, remained intact. Israel doesn't have the weapons necessary to destroy the underground facilities from the air. Only the United States does. Given the stakes, it was clearly in America's interest to destroy the Fordo site once and for all. Yes, destroying Fordo also served Israel's interest, but that shouldn't have been allowed to deter President Trump from ordering a strike if he determined, as he did, that such a strike would serve America's interests. In seeking the elimination of Iran's ability to deploy nuclear weapons on ballistic missiles, America's interest is identical to Israel's interest. Neither country can afford to allow Iran to marry its malicious intent to the destructive capability of a nuclear weapon. Israel launched targeted military strikes to reduce the threat posed by Iran's nuclear weapon program and ballistic missiles, and needed help to finish the job. In this case, America first meant attacking Iran's nuclear facilities. President Trump recognized that and acted accordingly. Now to the Jenny Beth Show. The Jenny Beth Show was on fire last week. Episode 125 dropped Wednesday of last week, and then episode 126 dropped on Friday as a special edition because of the timeliness of the subject matter. Episode 125 features Jenny Beth's conversation with Pastor Lorenzo Sewell, who's the pastor of the 180 Church in Detroit. The pastor shares the extraordinary tale of his transformation from drug dealer to pastor, and not just any pastor, but a pastor who's a strong supporter of Donald Trump and is concerned about election integrity. Episode 126 features Jenny Beth's conversation with Joel Pollack, senior editor-at-large of Breitbart News. The two have a riveting conversation about Israel and Iran, and why Iran must not be allowed to obtain a nuclear weapon. If you want to know why President Trump gave the orders he did to have American B-2 stealth bombers fly to Iran to drop bombs to destroy Iran's nuclear weapons capability, this is the episode for you. As always, both conversations are highly recommended. And that's our Washington Report for this week. Now to the call to action. Actually, we're still doing multiple calls to action. There's still a lot going on in Congress now, and we still need your help on multiple fronts. You'll be able to find the details on all this on the front page of our website at teapartypatriots.org. That's teapartypatriots.org. There you'll find a slider that will take you to a page with all kinds of detail, but here's the general outline. We still need your help in urging the Senate to move forward and move faster on confirming Trump nominees. We need your help in urging the Senate to strengthen the One Big Beautiful Bill Act the way we've discussed over the last several weeks, and we're getting results. For instance, the Senate Finance Committee title scrapped the increase in the SALT deduction from $10,000 to $40,000, and instead kept it right where it is at $10,000, just as we wanted. But we still need help on the other items, including removing the $1,000 per new baby entitlement giveaway. You'll find details on the webpage at teapartypatriots.org. We need your help in urging the Senate to pass the rescissions package. Well, that's our broadcast for this week. Thanks for tuning in. Please take a moment to share this broadcast with your Facebook friends and post it to your other social media accounts. We'll see you next week, same time, same place. Until then, be well and be active.